Greetings, thanks for tuning in. This is going to be a series of videos specifically about the Saitek X52 Pro controller system, or HOTAS setup, which includes the yoke or joystick and the throttle. It's going to be about Elite Dangerous specifically, but that doesn't mean that it can't be useful to people playing other games as well. Why am I doing this? Basically all the other videos I've seen online have been pretty shallow in terms of what they present in the controllers and not to the level of detail that I would want to see. Considering the sophistication and the amount of programming that can be done with this controller, it's really rich, and I think that we should really have some videos out there to kind of go and delve into all the details with the X52 in particular. And so I want to go and be very comprehensive and complete, going over everything about the X52 you could possibly ever want to know. So this first video in the series is going to be specifically about the buttons on the controller, and specifically later dealing with the notorious clutch button. What is the clutch button? What is its purpose? Why would we have it on or off? What situations? So on and so forth. So we'll dive into that. My name is Commander Gangrene TVP. That is my Elite Dangerous name or avatar, and I hope you enjoyed this series of videos. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, if you don't have an X52 Pro and you have yourself just a regular X52, don't worry too much about it. What you'll actually find is that the X52 and the X52 Pro have all the same buttons, have the same configuration and layout. The big differences that I know of, I do not own an X52, but it's my understanding that there's a double spring system within the joystick here, and that basically gives a little bit more stability there. And in terms of build quality, there's a little better build quality. There's some metal switches here, metal there, that are a little higher quality than the X52, which uses a lot more plastic components. So it's just a little bit of difference in the build quality in those springs. So for the most part, this will be completely useful for everybody. Another thing is, when I set up my X52 controller for a game, it usually takes me 2 or 3 days to set up the controller and get everything exactly set up the way I want, considering the complicated nature of programming this control. And what I'm going to do throughout the series of videos is, I've done all the hard work for you. I'm going to let you download my program and show you exactly how to get it set up and how everything works in the game, and how you can have top level experience with a complete HOTAS fully enabled setup inside Elite Dangerous specifically. So buckle up, here we go. We'll start talking about the buttons. So over here we have the Saitek X52 Pro Flight Controller window, where basically you can do a lot of diagnostics and also control some of the features. I'm going to go ahead and close it and show you how we go ahead and launch that. So if we go down here to our Saitek X52 Pro Flight Controller System box down here in our dialog, I can right click on that and I can bring up the control panel. So let's go ahead and go through this. Since access is in the top left corner, let's go ahead and talk about the accesses. You're going to find that there's at least 7 if not 9 accesses on the axis on the controller itself. You have the pitch controls. So if I pull back on the joystick or yoke, you're going to notice that that little crosshair goes down. So I'm pulling back. If I push forward on the joystick, it goes up there. So we're controlling the y-axis. We have the x-axis. If I push to the left and I push to the right, those are the 2 axes that are controlled specifically by the joystick. However, there is a 3rd axis there. If I twist it to the left, or if I twist it to the right, you'll see that there's a Z rotation there as well, and you can use that in lieu of rudder pedals in your game. I do not have rudder pedals, nor do I really feel any need to go out and get rudder pedals, because I'm very happy with the ability to control my yaw in flight simulators, and including Elite Dangerous with the Z rotation. That doesn't mean if you have flight pedals that you're in trouble. Basically what you do is, on the X52 there's an adjustable bottom platform which has the pinky trigger on it. You can raise it and lower that to adjust to the size of your hand. Underneath that, on the left side of the control, you'll see a little thing that says R lock. If you go ahead and manipulate that and pull it out, you can actually lock that joystick, so you won't be able to use that Z rotation. Now what I would also do in game is when I'm setting it up, I would also make sure I don't actually have the Z rotation programmed into it at all, but that will just make it so it gets a little less I wouldn't say sloppiness, but you won't have any kind of accidental turning if that's not the way you like it to feel in your hand. So you can shut that off. Then we have, of course, the Z-axis on the throttle. So you have all the way back towards you, and it's down to 0. You got all the way forward up to 100%. So that usually is used in the game to control your throttle in a plane, or also your collective in a helicopter. In Elite Dangerous, we use it to throttle our craft all the way up and all the way down. We have a couple other rotational axes here. So we have the X rotation. Now the X rotation is a little button that completely surrounds the clutch on the throttle, and if we push it up we can see our X rotation. Let me not confuse you. You can see the X rotation going up and down. That's the button that surrounds the clutch on the throttle, and the clutch is the button that looks like an eye. And then you also have a Y rotation, which surrounds the E button on the throttle as well, and you can adjust that up or down. And now I don't really have a use currently for these two axes of rotation within Elite Dangerous itself, but I am playing around with some ideas I'll talk about later and how we can use them. If you're using a traditional flight simulator that has a lot more complicated controls and a realistic type aircraft, some good ideas for this is you might be able to use, let's say, your Y rotation. You might be able to use that to control your fuel oxygen mix and what's going to the engine to control your output and performance. Maybe this X rotation, you could put this to your prop pitch on your propellers, so you can control how much those propellers are cutting into the wind or not, just by adjusting that. So it can be useful. And then of course we have the last one here in this area, which is the slider, which is right, if you have your thumb laying naturally in the throttle, it's going to lay across the slider and usually go to kind of where the D button is, and that slider can just be slid up and slid down. Now I am currently using this in Elite Dangerous, and we'll talk about how I'm using that. I have seen people use it for reversing throttle and things like that, but that's not how I'm using it. We'll get into that here in a bit. So now we talked about those axes over there. Let's go ahead and look to the right here and talk about the buttons and what all these buttons are. And like I said, sometimes when you're programming in a game, the button comes up with the number designation. Sometimes it comes up with the letter designation in your controller. So sometimes it's confusing trying to remember what's what. We're just going to clear away that confusion by talking about what each one of these buttons are. So if on the joystick or yoke, if I go ahead and press the trigger, you'll see that that's actually button number 1. Okay. Button number 2, there's a little safety on there. If you flip up the safety, there's a little crosshair button or a bomb button, whatever you want to call it. And if I press that, that's button number 2. Button number 3 is button A on the controller. Button number 4 is button B on the controller. Button number 5 is button C on the controller. And button number 6 is the pinky trigger on the controller. So once again, that's the trigger, bomb, A, B, C, and pinky trigger. Now the next two buttons are on the actual other side on the throttle. So that's 7 is button number D, and 8 is button letter A. So those are those buttons right there. You'll see the number 9 drops down to the toggle area there. So we'll talk about the toggles. There's 3 toggle switches on there. You can see them on the yoke here in this picture. And they're on the base of the joystick itself. So, and they're actually on the joystick labeled T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, and T6. So if I go ahead and hit those, T1 is the first one in the up position, T2 is the first one in the down position, then T3, T4, T5, and T6 respectively. So that's 9 through 14 there. Then we have buttons number 15 and 16. 15 is actually kind of a secret button. Some people know about it, other people don't. But essentially what it is it's a second stage in the trigger itself. So when we press the trigger, we'll find that we press number 1. Now if we press it more firmly and pull it all the way back, you'll see it 15 also activates. So there's no real way to activate button 15 without activating number 1. Now if you're playing a complex flight simulator, like a World War II flight simulator, you might have a plane that has machine guns and cannons. So what you could do is you could have a light pull on the trigger be your machine guns, a heavy pull be your cannons, and so you can basically use your cannons or your machine gun, your cannons, both, or none. So basically, depending on how much you use that trigger, you can activate that second functionality. I don't use that second functionality in Elite Dangerous because I don't really think that it has much of a use in this particular game, but it can be useful, like I said, in other games. Now, button number 16. Where's button number 16 at? Button 16 is actually on the throttle. If it's next to the little mouse stick, and if I can point to it here on the screen, it's this little button right down there. And if I click on that, that's actually usually your mouse left click, and the little stick over there is your mouse control. So that's 16. So there is no 17 or 18, you notice, but there is a 19 within the buttons there itself. So where's 19 at? 19 is actually on the throttle as well, and you can't see it here in the picture, but it would be on the front of the throttle. And if we scroll that little scroll wheel, it's actually a scroll wheel just like a mouse scroll wheel. You can actually see that we adjust this control here. So we have this control that has various settings that we can set, and we can actually program those. But if we take that mouse wheel and we just squeeze it, you'll see it clicks button number 19. And it's really easy to control that, more than you'd think, without accidentally hitting the mouse wheel and scrolling it like that. You just hold it, as long as your finger's not on the hat switch on the throttle, it's just over that. If you just squeeze slightly, you'll notice that that just naturally clicks, and it doesn't even adjust the scrolling at all. So it's a very easy button to use. It's a great extra button to have on there, and I do utilize that in Elite Dangerous for some things. So there we have 19. We do have 31, 33, 34, 32, and 39, but since we're at 19 down there, let's just go straight into 32 and 39. 32 is actually on the base, and it's this little wheel right here, this little silvery wheel. If you go ahead and you scroll it, you'll see it's got the same scrolling functionality as the 19 does, and if I press it in, it's the 32 button, and then 39 is the one right across from it. If I scroll that up or down, same deal. If I press it, I can activate it. Now those things are labeled on the controller. The first one, that 32, is a page up and a page down on the function button, on that function wheel, and the other wheel is MDF select, and it has an up and down arrow, and that's the 39 button. So that's the 32 and a 39, and then there's a 33 and a 34. So where are the 33 and the 34? 33 and 34 are the start and stop button next to those, and the reset button. So if I press the start and stop button, that's number 33, and the button below that is number 34. Okay? So that's what those buttons are, and by default they do stuff. They change your clock to a timer, and they start and stop your timer and reset it and stuff like that. So those are kind of like the default functionalities of those things. And last but not least, we saw that there's also a button number 31 in there. And what's 31? 31 is the clutch, and that's on the back of the throttle here, and it's got a little eye on it. And if you press it, you'll see that 31 is actually lighting up there. And we're going to go into a little more in depth on the clutch in this same video later on. So we're going to go ahead and skip that and come back to it. So looking down there at the 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, we have the 3 modes. And so the modes are actually controlled on the yoke or joystick on this upper right side. And there's a little metal wheel. It's metal on the Pro. And it has 3 modes. If we go ahead and we spin that and push it up with our thumb, it goes from red to pink or magenta, and then it goes from that up to blue. And I call that mode 1, 2, and 3. Maybe some people might call 3 1 and 1 3, but basically when you're looking at the X52 Pro, there are little marks on that metal dial, and that's called the top one 1, the middle one 2, and the third one 3. And they also kind of line up if you're counting down on this particular screen. So this control setup, the X52, actually has 6 modes of functions within it, and so that creates the ability for us to actually have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of buttons, literally, to work with. So I always recommend always using the pinky as a shift and utilizing the mode if you want to get full HOTAS set up out of your controller. So, and we'll get into that when we're looking at the next video. So then we'll just go down and look at the mini stick there. So there is a little stick on the throttle. It's right here. Next to the number 16 button, the mouse click, it does control the mouse. And so you can go up, down, left, right, or all over the place. So you can, you can program that to do whatever you want. You can make it a look thing, or you can just have it control your mouse, or you can program that into buttons, or you can also program that into two other axes to utilize in the game if you want to. And it does have, come back to center when you press them. So you could essentially use that for two other axes for throttling or whatever you want. But you could also, program them to button presses. But it all depends on how you want to set that up. And I do utilize that in Elite Dangerous, and I'll show you how. Well, I don't use it specifically, but I have created a nice little setup for you guys that want to use it. So I'll show you how that works later on the next video as well. And then we get to the last thing on this particular screen, which are the 3 hat switches involved in this joystick. Now we have point of view number 1, or hat switch number 1. I find that when I put my hand on the joystick, the thumb kind of naturally for me rests on that C, and I use that C to fire a lot. But to the right of the C button is that hat switch number 1, or point of view number 1. If I go ahead and click on that, you can see I can activate all the different directions on it, and that's the point of view number 1. Now point of view number 2 is directly above that C button. Now for those of you who have maybe smaller hands and you have a little bit harder time getting your thumb all the way up in there, you don't even really need to get your thumb all the way up into the middle of that to actually activate it. It has like 4 little directional pads on there, as you can kind of see. They kind of stick out on the 4 sides, the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. You can actually just push that little pad. So I'm just got my finger on that C button. I can actually just push that up. I can pull it down, push it to the left, push it to the right, and you can, as you get really good at it, hit the corners. But you sometimes, when you're hitting the corners, you will accidentally get the up, down, and the left and the right. So if you have it in the middle, maybe better at that. But you can really easily do up, down, left, and right with it. And if you get really good, you can hit the corners with pretty good reliability, or you can just put your thumb right in the middle of it and hit those corners real easy. So then you have the throttle hat. And so that hat switch is on the front of the throttle. You can see it just a little bit in the picture over there. But it's got the up, down, left, right, and the diagonals, just like every other hat switch that's on this thing. So you can, and all these hat switches can be utilized in a 4 configuration, up, down, left, right, or in an 8-way configuration with all the diagonal directions in there as well. So let's go ahead and flip through these other tabs here. We have the dead zone tab. I don't utilize a lot of dead zones within my particular controller. You can if you want. You just basically pull these little bars apart to whatever amount of dead zone you want. You can also control the top and bottom values for that particular axis. And keep in mind that each axis is an axis because you can utilize a whole range of values. You can have a low value, a little higher, a little higher, a little higher. You can literally have a whole range of values between the top and the bottom one, and not just an on or off situation like you have with a button or a hat switch. And you can see here there are 9 axes on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. When you can add in the 2 that you have there in the mouse. You have your LEDs tab. That just allows you to change the color and brightness of the LEDs in your controllers. I really don't mess with this much, but if you just wanted certain colors to kind of remind you of what they did or whatever, you could change them. Then we have the MFD, and brightness there for your screen, and how you want your time to display and such on there, and different clocks. We want to set different times for different parts of the world. Like for example, if you a lot of the times inside Elite Dangerous are set to Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. So you could have another clock in there, and if you flip to it, you can see what time it is in game. You flip it back to your local display time. You can flip back and forth between the two and see what time it is in game, what time it is locally. And it does kind of become helpful to actually see what time it is when you're playing a game, especially if you're worried about going to bed at a certain time to get up for work or something. So it's useful. And then we have what I wanted to talk about, the clutch settings. What's going on with the clutch? A lot of players, when they get in Elite Dangerous, they're saying, oh, my clutch button doesn't work, and they don't know why it doesn't work, and then usually they just go ahead and disable it. So what is the clutch? What is it designed to do? Why would we need it or not want it in our particular setup when we're creating, when we're programming something? The clutch setup, primarily its function is to, if you weren't able to get all of your functions within the 6 modes of the controls that are already in there, you could utilize the clutch function to get additional another 6 modes, or another 6 modes beyond that. You could basically have an unlimited number of modes by utilizing the clutch function and switching between different program settings you have in your controller, and you could do that on the fly. And I will give you a little demo of that. I'll pop in a little recording I made of the joystick here, and you guys will be able to see that. So here I'm going to demonstrate how the clutch works. I currently have it set to toggle mode, as that makes it much easier to do one-handed. So if I reach up and press the toggle button, you'll see it begins to flash. The flashing will also be going on point of view number 1, toggle hat number 1. By manipulating that hat, I can press up and down to select the system I want. So for example, if I had a program in which I had many flight controls handled here, but there was a sophisticated light support system, I could switch to life support. By going up and down, I can change. Pressing to the right, I can select that and lock it in. Now you can see I can manipulate life support by changing oxygen up, oxygen down, maybe temperature up, temperature down, and all the different settings that were involved for life support. Then switch back to Elite Pro, lock that in, and now you can see that I have thrust up, thrust down, thrust left, thrust right, and all the various buttons in game that would be for flight and for fighting and things like that. So if you had a very complicated system in which you could not utilize just 6 modes to get everything you wanted, you could alternatively have multiple setups and use your clutch to switch between them. So that's what the clutch button does, and the latched clutch button, what that enables to do is just like in the game where you have certain things where you can use press and hold to get it to work, or you can press it for a toggle. It makes the clutch go from a push the use to a toggle. So if you have it on latch mode, you'll press it, it'll stay on. You press it again, it'll turn off. There is one other feature of the clutch mode other than allowing you to change programs on the fly for your joystick. It also allows you, when you're holding down the clutch or when the clutch is activated, your controller will no longer send signals to the computer. So what it allows you to do is, if you hold the clutch button and you push any button on your joystick, it's going to tell you on your screen on your throttle what that button does without actually sending it to the game. So if you don't remember what the D button does, you could hold the clutch, press the D button, and then it would actually tell you what that did before you actually hit it if you weren't sure. Now, even without the clutch engaged, every time you press every button on here, and since I built this program for Elite Dangerous, every single button when you press on your joystick will display on the screen regardless as to what it specifically does when you're pressing it. So the clutch would just prevent you from doing something you weren't sure of if you wanted to check it. But I would turn it off. You will get used to what all the buttons are, and we will be having videos where we go through in detail what every single button does in the game and how to do every single action in the game through controls. When you've got a full HOTAS set up and a complete program set up with 6 modes of flight, then you're never going to need to use your keyboard. The only reason I even use my keyboard is if I have to do type chatting in game. A friend sends me a message or something and I want to type a message back to them. It's the only reason I use a keyboard. It's for typing specifically. So you won't need to use it for anything else. You'll be able to control every feature of your ship directly from the controls itself, from the throttle and the yoke. So I hope you guys tune in for the next video, and the next video will be going specifically into how do you get the program that I've already created and spent a lot of time doing and get that onto your machine And then, well, after we get that program on your machine, what does it do and how do you use it to become an elite player in Elite Dangerous? So I hope to see you then. Thanks. If you want, you can hit subscribe and you can hit like on the video. That'd be fantastic. Thanks. Bye.